We're here with Phil Lipof, who is the on-air news anchor on the weekends and who also works during the week on air for the 4, 5, and whatever else time they
4,
want
5,
you on.
and whenever.
Why don't you talk a little bit about how long you've been here at ABC, when you started in news, and your natural progression of.
Sure. I've been here at WABC for a little over 5 years. I started in the business in 1996 at KIDK in Idaho Falls, Idaho. I graduated Syracuse, not the journalism school, Newhouse in Syracuse, but I graduated without a resume tape, obviously, because I didn't study journalism. I studied speech, communication, and writing, which turns out to be good things to study in this business. And so I worked for free doing a lot of things for a while I put together a resume tape. Sent it out, begged for my first job in Idaho. And the news director said, I have many people better than you, but I figured a kid from Boston wants to come to Idaho so badly, you can have your first job. And that's how I got my first job. I wasn't interested in this field until junior year of college when I was watching the evening news, the national evening news, and I thought to myself, I wonder how they put that show together. And I went down to the student-run TV station at Syracuse University, and they let me do some live reporting and writing copy, and I just fell in love with it. So after a year and 9 months in Idaho, I came to Kingston, New York, to WRNN, which is an independent kind of regional news network, sort of like New York One, but different. And I anchored the evening news there, and I did some reporting, and I co-anchored the news with a woman who I then started to date. And then the two of us moved from WRNN to Miami, where I anchored the morning news and reported, and my wife reported on the 11 o'clock news. I call her my wife. We weren't married then, but I wound up proposing to her on air, and we got married. We then moved from Miami to Boston when my father's cancer came back, so they let us out of our contract so that I could go be with my dad because I knew he was going to be gone within inside of a year. So we moved back to Boston, and they hired us to anchor the news together.
Oh, that's cool.
So we were working again. So in Boston, we anchored the weekend morning news for 5 years together. I had 2 kids. My wife anchored the day she gave birth both times.
Wow.
She went right from the anchor desk to the hospital both times. Our kids are now 9 and 6, and we moved from Boston to New York to WABC. Boston is both of our hometowns. I never thought that I would really be anywhere else. My wife and I are anchoring in our hometown together, but when the job opened at WABC, this station is the best in the country, and there was no way I could say no to it. So we moved here 5 years ago. I took the job here. My wife did some other things, and here we are.
And now, what was it like actually working together and living together? Was it a hard dynamic?
People ask that question a lot. It really wasn't. I think it made our relationship better. It sounds odd because husbands and wives are like, oh, it's good we go separate ways during the day, and but my wife and I, we have a wonderful relationship. I think I found the greatest woman in the world. I assume she thinks she found the greatest guy in the world. We just celebrated our 11th anniversary. Love each other today like we did back then, and we worked on air for 5 years together in Boston, for almost 2 years in Kingston. We anchored together for probably 9 years, and it was wonderful. I loved it.
Now, how has news changed since you started to today? I mean, obviously there's a lot more internet access, and so things have changed with the immediacy of how you can get the news. But
the news business is completely different.
Yeah.
And the advice I give to young kids getting into the business is much different than the advice I gave to young kids getting into the business 8 or 9 years ago. When I got into the business, it was work as hard as you can, build a resume tape up, go to some small market, and just do everything. And the more you do, then you'll get up to bigger markets. And that seemed to be the way everybody did it back then. That certainly was the way I did it. These days, you have to know so much more in terms of technology. I needed to know how to operate a camera. I shot my own stories for 4 years. Focusing on a pole and then pulling back and walking into the shot, all the tricks that we did, old school. But these days, people need to know how to upload things, digital reporting, backpack reporting. There are these backpacks that send things via phone lines. That's how people are reporting today, and people are getting hired at bigger levels younger. Right. That's how the business is changing.
What are some of the hardest stories for you personally to cover, and what is one piece of advice that you can give in terms of not getting personally attached? Because that's obviously something that you have to worry about, is not giving your own personal opinion on a story as being a journalist.
Sure. We were talking about this a little bit before you and I,
Right.
before you rolled the camera. I think the line these days is so blurred between news people and opinion people. I think that has everything to do with the 24-hour cable news cycle. You have these people on cable news stations, it's not one in particular, it's all across the board, that are hired for their personality and their opinion. They cover the news of the day, but they're not news people. And I think viewers watch and see someone slanting it right, slanting it left, whatever they were hired to do at that particular cable network, and they mistake that for news. You know, people will say, oh, news people are biased one way or the other today. Well, true news people, definitely local news people here at WABC. I mean, I try every day to just give the facts. There's no slant one way or the other. My personal opinion has absolutely nothing to do with the story I'm covering, or it shouldn't. And I know this news organization, it's one of the reasons why I came here. It is such a phenomenal reputation, does news the right way, devotes resources appropriately, and a ton of resources. You know, we're in Rome right now. We travel all over the world to cover the news. We don't travel all over the world to give our opinion. It started getting harder for me to cover stories once I had kids, because I would go to a story of God forbid, a horrible bus crash where children had died, or a story I did once where a mother backed over her own infant in a car seat. I mean, there are those horrible stories that you hear, and I looked at them when I was younger as a news story. Go do the news story, get it on air. Then I had children, and I'm sure most reporters who have children will feel this way. You go there and you think about your wife backing over your child, or your child being on the school bus. And it made me a more compassionate reporter, made me understand the people I was covering better.
Why do you think your viewers connect so much to you? You're very personable on air, and you have a loyal following. And your Facebook comments, I've followed you for quite a while, and you have very loyal, devoted fans.
Yeah.
Why do you think they follow you?
Well, thanks for saying that. I think it's simple. I think it's the reason why Michelle Charlesworth and a lot of my colleagues have a core group of people that really feel like they know us, even though we've never met in person, because I am on air as I am off air. I don't put on any act. When Michelle and I are on the weekends and we're having a conversation, sometimes we forget we're on air, because what we're saying is real to each other, and we really do like each other. I consider her like a sister, and I think that relationship comes through on camera, and I certainly try to be on camera the way I am off. There's no facade, and so I think people see that and can relate to it.
What do you like to do during your free time, if you ever get free time? As today is not going to be one of those
No, there'll
days.
be no free time today. I'm covering Joe's shift because he's in Rome, sleeping for 3 hours, and coming back and doing my shift. But when I have free time, working out is on top of the list. Obviously, being with my family. I spend a lot of time with my 6-year-old daughter, my 9-year-old daughter, and my 6-year-old son, and my wife. Spend as much time as we can together. After that, I have to get to the gym every day. That's the only way I stay sane. You know, with crazy work hours and the content of the stories we're covering, it can really get to you. You cover an horrific story, you go home at the end of the day, and there are your beautiful children smiling at you, and it's wonderful, but you still have in your head what you covered that day.
Right.
It's difficult. I'm not gonna lie, it's difficult at times. But the gym, guitar, I'm a frustrated musician.
Yeah.
My son always says if I could be anything else, it would be a rock star. That would be cool. But no, I love music, listening to it, playing it, going to the gym, and being with my family.
Yeah, and you also do, on the side, have a show you do called Rock Talk, correct?
Yeah, it's a show called Rock Talk. It's shot at Feinstein's at the Lowe's Regency over on Park Avenue. Completely separate from what I do here at WABC's. I do it in my spare time. I do it in my day off, on my day off. And it's a cross between Inside the Actor's Studio and Unplugged. And I sit on stage with a musician, a singer-songwriter usually, and we talk about their music, then they play some music, then we talk about the songwriting aspects of it, because if there's one thing that I'm envious of, it's the ability, the gift, I believe, to write lyrics. I can play around and put chords together and make a song up on the guitar, but I don't have the ability to write lyrics, or any good lyrics.
Yeah.
You should see some of the stuff I've written. So when I get a hold of these people that I've been able to interview on the show, Ian Axel and Brendan James and Charlotte Sometimes and Kate Vogel, and these people write amazing songs, and it just flows out of them. So the fact that I get to sit on stage with them and talk about it is great. Live audience of 100 to 150 people, shows an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half. And that's another thing I look forward to. Try to do one a month, and I'm just in love with doing that. There's no money in it. I do it because I love music.
Is there one story that you've covered that has changed you in a way that you didn't expect to be changed, or not necessarily changed your opinion, but affected you so deeply that it's changed the way you thought about something?
I'd have to think real hard about changing the way I thought about something. There are certainly events that I've covered that have changed who I am, but I would think those events changed everybody watching it too.
Right.
I'm talking about September 11th.
Right.
Covering Katrina for 10 days in the Gulf. Trips to Israel and Germany, walking into the West Bank and seeing the gunfire and the kids throwing rocks and the army firing back, and that stuff changes you.
Yeah.
That stuff changes you. Seeing our wounded warriors over at Ramstein Air Base and Landstuhl Hospital, that changed me.
Right. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's thinking of doing this as a career, and you must have to have some sort of mental, capacity to handle something like that? How do you turn it off and just not let it affect you so deeply?
I think much in the same way police and firemen do. Mm-hmm. You'll see a police officer at at a murder scene or a scene where there was death, and for a while I couldn't understand how they could be having a conversation with a colleague and smiling or laughing about something, because if you don't put a barrier up and you let all of this pain that you cover in, it's going to affect you in a negative way. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying become cold. I'm not saying don't care. You can never lose the compassion, but you have to sort of compartmentalize it. You sort of put it here instead of here, because if it's here, it will. I mean, how long could you do that?
Right.
I have covered so many stories of children who have died. Just horrific, horrible stories that people go, oh, I don't want to hear about that.
Right.
If I'm describing it to a family member, they go, ooh, I can't even hear about it. And we're there. We're on the scene. We're there. And so, you have to compartmentalize it. I would say if you're going to get into this business now, you have to be prepared to do everything in this business. Every aspect of it. You're not getting in it to just report. You're getting in it to report, to shoot, to write, to upload, to blog, to Facebook, to tweet. Mm-hmm. This is the job today. So you have to be willing to do all of it. It is not as glamorous as it looks. Mm-hmm. It can be sometimes, but it is a grueling job with crazy hours.
Yeah.
I want people to be prepared for what it is, not for what they think it is.
Right.
It is a grueling at times job. It's also glamorous at times when you get to do the fun stuff.
Right.
But first and foremost, people who want to be journalists should get into this field, not people who want to be on TV. When interns ask me to help them, first question I ask them, and this is letting out a little secret, first question I ask them is, what do you want to do? Mm-hmm. If the answer is anchor the news, I'm out. You should not want to be an anchor. That can be a goal later on.
Right.
The best anchors were the best reporters, because they understand what it's like to be out there, they understand how to put a story together, and then they understand how to tell a story. So the people who say, I want to get into this business because I love telling stories, I love researching, fact-checking, creating, that's who needs to be in this business, and we need more of it.
And do you feel personality obviously has to play a big part? You're very easy to watch on television. Your
Thank you.
colleagues, with your colleagues, your rapport with your colleagues, and a lot of the people on ABC7 are, they mesh so well with each other. That obviously has to be something that's very important too.
Yeah, well, that's in part liking who you're working with, and that doesn't always happen. I happened to fall in love with a co-anchor once, but I married her.
Well, yeah, that definitely
you don't
helps.
always like who you're working with.
Right.
Hopefully you do. The hope is that you do. I'm fortunate that I love Michelle. She's like a sister, truly. But the idea is to be yourself, and that can be very hard. When I was in Idaho, and to a certain extent at WRNN in Kingston, I had to catch myself because I was young, I looked young, and I was trying to project this anchorman image.
Right.
And there's no need to do that. It takes years to learn how to be yourself. It's crazy. It sounds crazy because you say to someone, what's the best advice? Just be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But truly, when the cameras are on and the lights are on and you're trying to remember your lines or read a teleprompter, whatever it is, it's tough to be yourself. That's the best advice. Work on being yourself. Don't work on pretending to be someone who you think you need to be to do the news. Just be yourself. Add your personality to things, and hopefully people will like who you are.
Yeah, that's, well, the WABC viewers obviously love who you are. Everybody, enjoys watching you, and we really appreciate you sitting down with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.